Let's start. Today's daf from the Masechet Avodah Zarah. We're getting very close to the end. Is daf Samach Vav 66. And so yesterday we had a Mishnah, which is very relevant for today. And the Mishnah basically said that if you have Yain Nesach, which obviously has been a prominent part of this whole Masechta in the last few weeks at least, which is prohibited, right? So you have wine that is used by a non-Jew to worship their God. It's Aser. And so if that wine pours onto grapes, which you could see would happen, the grapes, you can wash them off and then they'd be kosher to eat. But if you don't wash them off, or if you can't wash them off, then if the wine gives taste to the grapes, that's how we understood the Mishnah, then the grapes are prohibited, okay? Now, the question that we're going to deal with today, which is I think what we're up to, the top word on Daf Samach Vav Amud Aleph, I assume, is what is the status of grapes and wine? Because we have a principle, I'm giving away a lot of the daf here, but it's important, that there's a concept called bitul, right? That if you put one object into another object, sometimes the asur object prohibits the permitted one, and sometimes it doesn't. And obviously a lot of it has to do with how much is the volume, right? Is it double? Is it rove? What do you go with? But there is a halacha, which we're going to quote in a minute, that it depends on whether the thing is min b'mino or min b'she'eno mino. Is it one type in the same type, or is it something different? And in general, the principle we're going to have today, which is not entirely consistent with what we're going to learn at Chulin in a year or so, which is why Tosfot here gets very excited, but is that if you have things that are different species, min b'she'eno mino, you take wine, let's say, and you pour it into your soup, right? Let's just say that's min b'she'eno mino. Then in order for the wine, which is yain nesech or wine that's treif or whatever, or juice that's not kosher, to passel the other dish, it has to be what's called notein tam. It has to give taste. And the general rule is that in order for something to give taste, it has to be 1/60th, right? So that's where we get batel b'shishim. Things are batel if it's 60. So if you drop one little bit of milk, let's say, into a big pot of chicken soup, if it's less than 1/60th, it's considered to be batel. Now, there's a lot more nuance there, but let me just use that example. So that is min b'she'eno mino. But if something is the same species, min b'mino, right? You have one thing, so correct, there's a lot more nuance. Yes, you're not allowed to do that on purpose, for sure. And that's a different principle called Ein Mevatlin Isur Lechatchila. But if you have min b'mino, if you have something that's the same species, so let's say you have a little bit of milk that's, I don't know, not kosher, you don't eat chalav stam, and you drop it into a big vat of milk that is kosher, then it never becomes batel. So that min b'mino is not batel. It's not clear why there would be such a big difference, but that is the halacha. We're going to accept it. I'm happy to talk about it more at the end of the daf if we want to. The question that we're about to address is, how do you define a min? What's considered to be a species? And the Mishnah illustrates this perfectly, because are grapes and wine considered to be the same thing? Most people in this room would say, no, of course not, but that's going to be our question, right? Are grapes and wine considered to be the same thing? So the Gemara makes another assumption. Again, I can't verify this because I don't have the wine knowledge, that when you take a grape and you eat it, and you take fresh wine, and you take wine, you squeeze it, and you stand next to it, that tastes the exact same way. That basically wine, I guess, fresh right away, and grapes taste the exact same. As wine ages and it becomes, more mature and ferments and stuff, then it changes taste differently.
Do we actually call it wine when it's not fermented? I don't even think that it has that status.
Right. So we call it in our Gemara chamra chadita, which means new wine, but I don't really know if
it's grape juice, basically.
Okay, or grape juice, but juice. So call it grape juice. That's fine. But basically, what we're saying is that grape juice tastes just like grapes. It's just one's a liquid and one's a solid. So that informs the discussion. Says the Gemara, top word of Daf Samach Vav Amud Aleph, chamra atika. If you have old wine, right, which tastes different, the invi, and it drops onto grapes, which was the case of our Mishnah, divrei hakol, well, not necessarily, but might be, divrei hakol benotein tam. Everyone agrees that the prohibition from the yain nesech on the grapes is only if it gives taste. because those are different things. And notin tam again means usually 1/60th.
And we're also talking about grapes that are like that are not cracked. We're talking
Not
about
correct. Correct. Not correct. Chamra chadata. Now let's say you have wine that's new and they fall b'invi, then it's a machloket. Abaya Amar b'mashu. Abaya says because I'm going to quote this in a second, because the new wine, or as Miriam calls it, grape juice, is the same thing as grapes basically, then it answers it even a minuscule amount. So you could have 10,000 grapes and 5 drops of wine, it would be prohibited. Then Rava Amar benotin tam. Rava says, no, it's same thing as different as old wine, and it has to give a flavor, which means it has to be 1/60th. Abaya Amar b'mashahu. Abaya says even a tiny bit, because butter taima azlina. You go after the taste of the object, and idi v'idi chad taimahu. Both grape juice and grapes taste the same way, right? One is liquid, and one you get the liquid in your mouth when you eat it. And therefore, Havile min b'mino, it's the same species, and min b'mino b'mashu. Everyone agrees, and this we're not discussing in today's Gemara. Everyone agrees that min b'mino is batel, is not batel, asers, even with a tiny amount. And Rava says, 6 lines from the top, that you have to have noten tam. You actually have to have a significant amount, which is a small but significant amount, because butter shma azlinan. You go after the name of the thing. And hai shma lechud, one is called wine or grape juice, and hai shma lechud, and one is called grapes. And so since they are different things, and if you walked into the store and said, give me a pound of grapes, they would never give you a pound of grape juice, obviously, right? It doesn't mean the same thing. So therefore, havile min b'she'eno mino, it's one species or one type with something else. In min b'she'eno mino, bin noten tam. That's the nuntet, is abbreviation for noten tam. It has to give taste. So that is the machloket Abaya and Rava about whether you look at the name of something or the taste of something, the flavor. Now, says the Gemara, let's try to prove it from our Mishnah. Our Mishnah did not specify what kind of wine and what kind of grapes. Well, we don't care about the grapes, but what kind of wine? Tanan. Now, read our Mishnah. Our Mishnah from yesterday said, quote, Yayin nesech shnafal agabe navim. You have yayin nesech that falls onto grapes. It answers them, right? Now, says the Gemara, we assume if you read our Mishnah that it's talking about all kinds of wine, not just grape juice, but even old wine and even new wine, right? So it could be any type of wine. So we assume that it's even, that's how I think, read the Gemara, even new wine, meaning even grape juice, be'invi, which remember, according to Abaya, that's the same thing. So it would be posel b'mashahu. According to Rava, it's benoten tam. And my lav benoten tam. Presumably our Mishnah is saying you have to give a taste. So our Mishnah supports Rava against Abaya. Says the Gemara, well, Abaya would tell you low. It's b'mashahu. Our Mishnah is referring to even a minuscule amount of this wine falling onto the grapes. So it's impossible if you read the end of the Mishnah. Hamidiktani Seifa, the end of the Mishnah says, Zeha klal, this is the rule, kol shebahana'ato benoten tam asur. Anything that its benefit it gives is a taste, is asur. Af kol she'in bahana'ato noten tam mutar. And if it doesn't give taste, or it gives a bad taste, it's mutar. But that implies that the discussion in our Mishnah is about giving taste. And our Mishnah says any type of wine. So our Mishnah seems to support a Rava against Abaya. And Abaya would tell you that, you know what? Matnitin b'chamra atika v'invi. Our Mishnah is only talking about old wine because, sort of as Miriam pointed out in the beginning, most people, when they think of wine, they don't think of freshly squeezed grapes, right? They don't consider that wine. Wine is the fermented and the aged. And so when our Mishnah says yayin, Abai would have to say our Mishnah is limited to old wine, which tastes different than grapes or grape juice. And therefore, it's, according to everybody, is considered to be different, and it's been notain tam. So that's the first machloket. The second machloket we're going to have now, which we're almost halfway down, is a similar machloket between Abai and Rava about the next case. Let's say you have chala de chamra, right? You have chala means vinegar of wine, right? I don't know how you make vinegar, but if your wine sits out for long enough time, it becomes vinegar, I guess. It's probably a better process. And you have chala de shichra. And you've got vinegar that comes from beer, which I didn't know beer does that either, but maybe some types of beer. You leave them out for long enough. I know we have apple cider vinegar or things like that, but you can have beer vinegar, I guess. So you have these two mixtures of vinegar. And one is, let's say, truma, or the yayin is yayin nesach, and one gets mixed into the other one, right? Or chamra dechiti, you have chamra, which means like Chamira, I mean, like kol chamira. We say it before Pesach, leaven, basically. Like, right? Kol chamira v'chamia, the b'rshuti. So you have like this leavening thing, meaning which is again very old grain, I guess, becomes leavened, right? So you have leavened grain, chiti, or chamira desari, or you have chamiri from barley. Again, they're very similar, but they're obviously different species. They taste differently. So in those cases, Abaya says the opposite opinion, and Rava also, because Abaya says benotin tam, that actually, if they get mixed together, it's not the same species, even though both are vinegar or both are what's the English word for chamira? Both are leaven, right? Because you go after the taste, and they don't taste the same. One is wine, and one is beer. And where am I? Bayamar benotin tam, because butter time ma'azlinan, you go after the taste of the object. V'hai time malachod, v'hai time malachod. Each one is its own thing. No one who knows what they're tasting would confuse vinegar from beer with vinegar from wine. V'havine min b'sheino mino, so there are two different types, and min b'sheino mino benotin tam. The principle is that one thing that mixes into something that's different than it has to give taste to make it aser. And Rava here is machmir and says, no, even a smaller amount. It's bimashu, because butter shma azlina. You go after the name of the object. So the same way Rava before said by grape juice and grapes, they're different things. Here he says, Havi le, hai chala mikri, v'hai chala mikri. This one's called vinegar, and this one's called vinegar. Hai chamira mikri, v'hai chamira mikri. This is called leaven, and this is called leaven, and they do similar things. Havi le min bimino, and therefore you consider them the same thing because they're both types of vinegar. V'chol min bimino b'mashu. So it would only, so anything that's the same type would aser the bigger thing, even with the small amount. So this is the same machloket of Rav and Abaya, but now flipped around. So one is that there's a chumrah if you have things that have a different name, but taste the same, that according to Abaya, they're the same thing, according to Rava, they're different. And here you have things that have the same name, but they taste different, right? And so according to Abaya, you go after the taste and they're different. And according to Rava, you go after the name and they're the same. So that is the first machloket. Okay, continues the Gemara now. We're going to get into more deep details about this. Where am I? Amar Abaya, right? Says Abaya, Mina Amina Butter Time Azlina. Says Abaya, what is my source? Right? How do I know that if you have two objects, and again, their taste might be the same, you combine them, or their names might be the same, you combine them. Says Abaya, go after the taste. It doesn't matter what it looks like. It doesn't matter what it's called. It matters what it tastes like. How do I know that? Because there's a following, it's actually a Mishnah. It's not. We've got a Mishnah in Masechet Orla, which says the following, right? Remember, food that's Orla is asur, right? You can't eat food that's Orla. So let's say you harvest from your garden some food that's Orla, and Orla is the first few years, right, of something growing. And you want to put this, let's say you harvest some basil from your garden, let's say, and you want to put it in your soup, right? So says the Mishnah in Masechet Orla, if you have tavlin, if you have spices, right? So meaning you're putting a very small amount into a soup pot. But if you have shnayim ushlosha shemot, it has 2 or 3 names, meaning you're doing several different spices that are called different. Rashi's example, vehein min echad, but they all come from the same species. Rashi's example is you have black pepper and white pepper, and Rashi's third example is long pepper. I don't exactly know what long pepper is, but he says pilpul shachar, pilpul yilavan, and pilpul aroch. Which again, I'm not really sure what that means, but that's a great example, right? White pepper, black pepper. These are the same pepper, but they are different, right? Different names. Or says the Mishnah, min shlosha, even 3 different species. And you put them together into a pot. There are asurim, right? Those things aser the pot, meaning if they're arla, everything in the food becomes arla. Umitztarfin. Now they can combine together. And this is the chiddush, right? Because let's say you put a little bit of pepper in and it has no taste, right? You put a little bit more pepper, a different type of pepper, and it has no taste on its own. But the combination of all 3 imparts a taste into the bowl. So the Mishnah says that you combine all 3 things. Now the question, of course, is, are all 3 things the same min or not? Because you only combine things if they're the same species, right? So, and Omer Chizkiah, now Chizkiah explained in the Mishnah in Orla, Hacha b'minei metika askina. You know why we combine them? Because they're all things that sweeten the dish, right? So obviously, when we have spices, right, you think of things that are spicy and sour and sweet, right? There's different kinds of spices and umami, right? So these are all things that sweeten the dish, even though they're very different, right? They might be pepper, which probably won't sweeten it, and coriander and cinnamon or whatever it is, but because they all do the same thing, they can be combined, right? Because they can all make it sweet together. Now, so says Abaya, let me try to understand this Mishnah here. How can you combine three individual spices that each one alone would have an insignificant impact, but together they have an impact, and say that together they combine and they make the dish possible? Amr Bishma, says Abaya, the last of the narrow lines, butter, time, mazlinan. I understand if you care mostly about the taste, then you would say kul echad taimo. I don't care that one is coriander and one is pepper and one is cinnamon. They taste the same. They're all quote unquote sweet or sour or spicy or whatever. And therefore you combine them. Elai Amrit Butter Shmazlina. And if you, like Rava, care about what the name is it grapes or juice or wine or whatever, then Hai Shmalachud, Hai Shmalachud. Each one's got its own name. So there shouldn't be any combination. So that seems like a really good proof that Abai is correct. Rava Amar Lechana, Rava would say to you that in fact is not the case. Hamani Rabbi Meir. This is an opinion of Rabbi Meir, because Rabbi Meir has a very specific opinion that says that you can combine Isurim. Rashi understands that he disagrees with Chizkiah. Chizkiah said the reason you can combine them is because they taste the same. Rava says the reason you can combine them is not because they taste the same. Taste has nothing to do with it, according to Rava. Says Rava, the name of something matters, the taste does not matter. So how can you combine these things? Because there's an opinion of Rabbi Meir, the Tanya Rabbi Yehuda Omar Mishum Rabbi Meir, that minayin nechol isurin shebetor shemitztarfin zem zeh. There's a special pasuk that teaches you that all prohibitions in the Torah, when appropriate, combine with each other. Shenemar, because the pasuk says, "Lo tochal kol to'eva," and what we learn from that pasuk is, don't eat kol to'eva, meaning anything that is prohibited to eat. Kol sheti'afti lecha. Anything that I said don't eat, that is off limits, it has a category of this lo taseh of lo tochal, bal tochal. And therefore, because of that, they can combine together. So it's not because you care about the taste. Says Rava, we don't care about the taste. And when you have general isurim that isur and heter or yain nesach or something, you go after the name of the thing for the min and not the taste. But there's a specific halacha that when it comes to Isurim, you can combine Isurim together, meaning all these things are Arla, or all these things are Tameh, or all these things are whatever, right? Arla is Asr. So you can take three things that are Arla, that are Asr, and combine them together, even if they're not the same min, and even if they don't taste the same, and even if there's nothing to do with taste. It has to do with the fact that they're prohibited. And so that's the reason for this Mishnah, and that is nothing to do with my discussion about dropping wine into grapes. That's Rava's opinion. Continues the Gemara now, 2 lines from the bottom. The next case, and this is a fascinating halacha, which is also a little bit hard to understand. Maybe I'll speak it out outside first, because it might be easier. So the Gemara has a great discussion about the fact that we're going to talk about dropping vinegar and wine together, right? You take vinegar and wine and you put them together. Now, of course, if you took a drop, let's say a tablespoon of vinegar, I'll put it the other way, a tablespoon of wine, and you dropped it into a liter of vinegar, right? After you drop that tablespoon of wine into vinegar, what you have in front of you is a lot of vinegar, right? There's no more wine, because it mixes together and obviously becomes the same thing, right? But the question is, when does that mixing actually happen, right? Because the question of bittul, right? Let's say this little bit of wine is yain nesach, right? And you put it into the vinegar, as soon as it mixes with the vinegar, it's now vinegar, right? And that's the same min, it's min b'mino. But when it was yayin, when it was prohibited, it was min b'sheino mino, it was different min. The Gemara introduces a concept of smell. And it says that in fact, there is, besides the physical mixing, there is the scent, there's the smell and the gases maybe of the object. And if you take wine and you drop it down into vinegar, the vinegar is so pungent that a millisecond before the wine integrates into the vinegar, it already smells like vinegar. And therefore, for some purposes, says Abaya, we'll see in a second, that wine is actually vinegar before it hits the vinegar. And once it hits it, it's the same min, because since it already smells like vinegar, it is vinegar basically, and therefore it's min b'mino, and it would aser even with a tiny bit. So this is crazy chumrah, right? It's where you take a drop of wine, you pour it into vinegar, and you call it mixing the same thing with itself. So let's read that inside. You'll see where this goes. So the other way, we don't say that. Chala lego chamra. If you drop a drop of vinegar, that's usher for orla or whatever, shmita or whatever, into wine, God bless you. Divrei Yaakov benotein tam. Everyone agrees that those are different things, right? One is vinegar, one is wine, and the isser is only if the vinegar gives taste, meaning it's 1/60th of the wine. But the opposite way, chamra lego chala, if you drop wine, drops of wine, that's a yain nesach, into vinegar, Abaya says b'mashu. Abaya says it would be prohibited with even a minuscule amount, which is the halacha of the same species, min b'mina. And Rava says benotin tam. It seems like we pass like Rava, but anyways, Rava says it has to give taste. Why? Abaya amar b'mashahu. Abaya says even a little bit because, as you turn the page, Daf Samach Vav Amar Bet, Recha Chala, because says Abaya, this says Abaya, yeah, a millisecond, not a minute, a moment before this wine hits and mixes with the vinegar, it already smells like vinegar because the vinegar is overpowering. It's a tiny bit away from it. It takes on the smell of the vinegar, but the taste is still wine because it actually hasn't mixed yet, right? The time of chamra. So in that moment, you have something that tastes like wine, but smells and has the aura and the smell of vinegar. So then, says Abaya, that's considered challah. That's considered vinegar. And so when the wine hits the vinegar, it's already vinegar. And havile min b'mino, so then you have basically vinegar of yain nesach mixing with vinegar, and min b'mino b'mashu. Rava says that's ridiculous, right? It's a notein tam, because recha chala, if the smell of something is vinegar, and the tama is chamra, but it tastes like wine because it is wine. It hasn't touched the vinegar yet. Then everyone agrees, says Rava, or not everyone, but I say that it's chamra. That's considered to be wine, and so you had wine drop into vinegar, and therefore havile min b'she'eno mino. It's one type in a different type. Wine into vinegar. V'chol min b'she'eno mino b'notein tam. And everything that's min b'she'eno mino is taste. Okay. So that is a very interesting halacha, and we're gonna discuss a little bit more. But Abaye has this really outstanding opinion, or a little bit outrageous opinion, that because it smells, because it's taken on the smell of the vinegar, in the assumption that vinegar is a very impactful thing, which I think it is, right? And who smelled vinegar, it has a very pungent aura and smell. That the drop of wine a moment before it touches the vinegar already smells like vinegar, and therefore we treat it like that. Okay, because Abaya is going to say that the smell really, really matters. Says
Is that also based on the fact that the wine comes from vinegar?
No.
Like if you drop of milk, it'd be the same thing?
Correct, yeah. Unless we thought that the smell of the milk wouldn't absorb it, but yeah. No, it's not, yeah, so it's a good point, but it's not because of that, right? It's because of smell. So we'll see this in a second. It's because Abaya says that the smell of something really is much more impactful than Rava says, meaning it has a big impact. Continues the Gemara. And this gets to the next case, which is connected, which is Hai Bat Tiha, right? Let's say you have a Bat Tiha. I don't really know what an English word is for a Bat Tiha, but Rashi and Tosfos here actually elaborates on Rashi, explains that they basically would make I think this is Tosfos Pshat in Rashi, that in the stopper of a barrel, they would put a little straw that you could basically get some of the gas, some of the smell out of the wine barrel without introducing air and without drinking it. And so if, let's say your barrel, you can't open your wine barrels to see if they're maturing properly. You can't see inside of them. They would stick this little straw in somehow. They would smell it. And by that smell, if you were obviously highly skilled, you can determine, is the wine ready? Should you leave it for another month? Is it time to serve it? That kind of thing. So basically you could introduce some kind of little small connection and get a scent from the barrel without touching the wine, without drinking any of the wine. So now the question is there an English word for it, Miriam, in yours? Or?
No, there isn't. It's just that they also add that the Aruch and the Rabbanu Hananel say that the tester would place his mouth over the hole and inhale the wine's aroma, not through a straw, but directly on the hole that is like in the stopper.
Got it.
So
okay, it's very interesting because we'll see. I'll say in a second. The question says the Gemara. First of all, If an Ovei Kochavim does this to a Jew's barrel, it's not a problem because he didn't drink it, he didn't touch it. There's no yain nesach, right? Ovei Kochavim b'Yisrael shaper dami. You have an abbreviation too? Shindal? Yeah, that's fine. It's not a problem. But Yisrael b'Ovei Kochavim. Let's say you're a Jew and you, and there's a non-Jew who's got yain nesach, and he says to you, you have a reputation as being the best wine smeller in town. Can you come smell my wine for me? Atosis points out, obviously, you can't pay you because you can't take money to work on yain nesach, right? So, and you can't get any favors from it. So clearly you're doing it because, out of the goodness of your heart. The question is, says the Gemara, is that okay or not? So Yisrael b'dovei kochavim, Abaye says it's asur. You can't smell wine that's yain nesach. And Rava says mutar. Why is it asur? Abaye omer asur, because recha milti, because smelling it is the equivalent to drinking it, which is a crazy statement to make, right? It's saying, that's why I think probably why the Aruch adds that you put your mouth on it maybe, but it's not that you're getting hana'ah, that you're getting benefit because, you smell a beautiful perfume and you get benefit. It's saying that Bias says that it's actually considered to be eating it because the smell of something is equivalent to the taste, basically. And so you're tasting the wine. And so it's prohibited. Rava says mutar. Rava says it's permitted because reichalav milti, because smell is nothing. What do you mean? Smell is not a prohibition. There's no prohibition on smelling a cheeseburger if you walk by, right? It's not eating it. So reichalav milti. I don't know if a buyer would take it that far, if it's only yain nesach, right? If you can't walk in the street and smell non-kosher food. Anyways, says Rava, mina minala. Says Rava, how do I know derecha velo klomu, that the smell or the fumes and that of object is nothing? It's not, because we have a Mishnah in Masechet Trumot, and the Mishnah Masechet Trumot says you have a oven, right? And you burn wood in order to heat up your oven, and then obviously the way they used to do it, which is you would burn up the wood, then it would turn into ash. Would heat up the oven became hot, it absorbed the heat, and then you cooked on the oven. So it wasn't that you were cooking on the fire, right? You were cooking on the oven, basically, that was heated up by whatever wood or coals or whatever thing you burnt, right? Because if you're heating it up on the fire, it's a whole different problem. But you basically have a tanur, you have an oven, shesigo b'kimun shel truma. You heat it up with kumun shel truma. Kumun is, set in mind, cumin.
Yep.
Yeah, so, but basically you used wood, or spices, right, of truma. You burn them up, and basically, I guess it's like people to smokers. It's like what do you call it? Like cherry apple wood or something, right? So you basically use this thing to heat up the oven, but the thing, of course, has a huge aroma, right? It's not like you use bland wood. You use cumin, which I never burned cumin in my life, but I imagine if you burn cumin, it probably has quite a pungent smell, right? So basically, you heated up the oven with cumin. And then afabo atapat. Then the oven's hot. You put your bread into the oven and you baked your bread. So now the question is the bread truma or not? Right? Truma can only be eaten by a kohen. Can only a kohen eat the bread? Says the Mishnah in Masechet Trumot, hapat muteret. The bread is mutter to eat to every Yisrael. It's not truma. Lefisha ein tam kimon elarecha kimon. You don't have any taste from the cumin. You have the smell of the cumin, right? But you don't have taste from it. It's not like you put the cumin into the bread. So because of that, it's nothing. So says Rava, I got a perfect proof to me that you can have the whole aura of the cumin. It's the oven stinks like cumin, but it doesn't count. Doesn't matter. Abaya says shani hata. That's different because there mikla isura. You burnt up the iser, meaning you burned the cumin completely before you put the bread in. So there is no essence, basically, that smell is coming from. And because there's no essence where the smell is coming from, the smell doesn't matter. The only time, says Abai, that a smell matters is if the mother, right, that caused the smell, in this case, let's say the wine barrel, the wine is still there. So if you're smelling a scent that comes off the wine, it's like you're drinking the wine. If you smell a scent that was there because the wine was there a week ago, that's not considered to be a problem. So there's a difference, as Abaya, which you could tell is a little bit of a stretch, right? Between a smell that's there, but the source of the smell is gone. In this case, you burned up the cumin, so it's ash, or a case where the actual cumin would still be there, let's say. So Abaya makes that distinction. Now, says Rav Mari at the wide line on Daf Samach Vav Amabed, Kitnai. In fact, there seems to be a
It seems like he would say you wouldn't be able to smell the oven directly. You could just eat the bread because the oven is now gone, basically.
No, not the oven, the cumin, you mean?
Right. You couldn't stand next to the oven, right? He would say that it's usher to stand next to the oven
While it's
and
burning.
while it's burning,
Right.
enjoy the smell of the burning cumin.
Right. I don't know yeah, I suspect so, but I don't know for sure if that's correct because I don't know if there's some Isser of Yain Nesach that's more than that. Right. Maybe if I really only said smelling something's like eating it. Like I said, walking in the street and smelling someone cook a cheeseburger, right? The question is that eating a cheeseburger, right? So I'm not sure if he takes it that far. I don't know. It could be Tosafot Talks, but I didn't read all these Tosafot today at least. But says Rav Mari at the first wide line Kitznai. In fact, there's a Machloket Tanaim. There's another Mishnah. This is a Mishnah later in actually it's the earlier Mishnah in Trumot that seems to say relevant halachot for this discussion. Because the Mishnah says the following: Harodeh patchama. Right? Let's say a person is rodeh patchama. Rodeh is a great verb. I never know how you translate it, but we had in Shabbos, if you recall, a ton. There was this huge skill. I guess it was very skillful that they would take their dough and I guess plaster on the side of the oven, right? You still see people do this.
I remember.
And then there was that whole skill in taking it off the oven in a way that made it proper. And remember, we can't do it on Shabbat. Remember, we had a whole discussion about doing this on Shabbat. It's a malacha, it's a big skill, it's a malachet machshevet. So rodet is the verb that refers to the process of taking the dough out of the oven. Which again, it sounds to us like you just take it out of the oven, but it was a very skilled thing. So but that's not relevant for our Mishnah. But you take bread out of the oven, so it's steaming hot bread, right? And you place the bread down. There's nowhere to put it. There's a barrel of wine that's truma, and you put the bread down on top of the barrel. Now, of course, the fumes, or I guess the smell of the wine is going to be absorbed into the bread, fresh hot bread, let's say, right? So Rabbi Meir says it's osir, that you can't eat that bread unless you're a Kohen, right? It's truma. The bread got the spirit, the smell of the truma. And Rabbi Yehuda says it's matir. Rabbi Yehuda says no problem. You can eat that bread. Okay. Now, before I quote Rabbi Yossi for a second, this is the machloket Tanaim. That Rabbi Meir seems to say the smell is a problem and the bread becomes truma, basically. And Rabbi Yehuda doesn't care. Now, Rabbi Yossi has an in-between opinion, which again is not really relevant in terms of that machloket. Rabbi Yossi says, well, it depends on what kind of bread it is, right? B'shel chitin, if it's wheat bread, then, matir b'shel chitin. He permits wheat bread because he says that doesn't absorb a smell, but he's oser b'shel sa'orim. But barley bread is prohibited. Why? Mipnei sa'orim sho'avot. Sa'orim absorb a tremendous amount, and therefore they take in the smell. But the Rabbi Yossi is not relevant because Rabbi Yossi seems to agree with Rabbi Meir that if the smell is taken up, it's prohibited, right? And Rabbi Yehuda says it's permitted. So this seems to be a machloket about what Abaye and Rava talked about. My lav b'hakam ifli. It seems that the machloket is Demar Savarecha Miltahi. Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yossi seem to hold that the smell counts and that the smell of truma makes the bread truma. And Mar Savarecha v'lo klamu. And Rabbi Yehuda says, who cares? Smell is not an object. You don't care about the smell. So that seems to be the machloket, Abaye, and Rava. Says Mar, you're right. The Rava vadetznahi. Rava has no way out of this because Rabbi Meir clearly says that the smell is a problem. And Rabbi Meir disagrees with Rava, but Rabbi Yehuda agrees with him. So he's got someone to rely on. Abaya mile Motzaei. Does Abaya have to think that Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with him? And Rabbi Yehuda says it's mutar because smell doesn't matter. Amar lecha Abaya, Abaya would say to you, I disagree with that reading of the Mishnah. Because lav mi itmar lav, if you recall, we talked about this Mishnah in Trumot, not we, meaning the Gemara, our colleagues, and we have a statement of Amar Rabbi Brachan Amar Reish Lakish, that the Mishnah is really a little bit more complex than you're making it out. It's not a question of smell or no smell. If it's pat chama, the chavit ptucha, look, if the bread is hot and it came out of the oven and the barrel is open so that the wine's fumes can come out, divrei hakol asura. Says Rabbi Bar Bachan in the name of Reish Lakish, everyone in the Mishnah would agree that it's asur, which is the opinion of Abaya, that the smell of the truma would make the bread truma, right? Everyone agrees in that case, says Rabbi Bar Bachana. Bipat sonenet, if it's cold bread, meaning it's stale old bread, and chavit migufa, and it's a barrel that stoppers in it, meaning it's not open, then divrei hakol mutar. Everyone would agree that's mutar because there's no smell in the bread. Lo nechliku, the whole machloket in the Mishnah is when you consider bread to absorb the scent. El bipat chama v'chavit migufa, Either you have hot bread, which of course absorbs things because it's moist, but it's a closed barrel. And the question is how much leaks out of the closed barrel, or you have pat sonen v'chavit petucha. You have a cold bread, so a stale bread, but an open barrel. So again, that's the machloket. Rabbi Meir says it does absorb the smell. Rabbi Yehuda says it doesn't absorb the smell. Rabbi Yossi says if it's barley, it absorbs it. If it's wheat, it doesn't absorb it. But says Abaya, and Rabbi Barchana supports this, everyone in the Mishnah seems to say that smell matters. And says Abaya, Hadidi Nami, my case also, right, where I talked about the case of Baktia, where you went and you smelled the wine to see if it's mature. That is like hot bread and an open barrel because it's wide open, and I'm an expert in this. And so you're really absorbing that smell and enjoying it. And therefore, it would be considered like drinking and eating yayin nesach, and therefore it would be prohibited. And that's what Abaya says. Everyone supports me. So that is, again, there was a Mishnah before that seemed to support Rava. Abaya pushed it off. This Mishnah seems to support Abaya. And so that is the machloket about whether smell is like eating it in regards to yayin nesach. And we'll stop there at the 2 dots.
Oh.
These are short dapim because we get a lot of Tosfot. And God willing, pick it up tomorrow morning at 7:45 a.m. if everyone can make it. On time, Chodesh Tov. Chodesh.
Unfortunately, I
What'd
can't
you
make
put in?
it.
Sorry?
Unfortunately, I can't make it because here in Lakewood, they daven at 7 a.m. and being Rosh Chodesh, davening will not be done until about 8:30.
Got it. Okay. Well, we will miss you. We hope you can catch the recording or
Yes.
catch it somewhere, and we'll see you, God willing, next week. Chodesh Tov.
Chodesh Tov.
And James, thanks for sharing the long pepper. We're reading it on Wikipedia now. We lost him.